again, sometimes they don't upload on time.
Sometimes, yeah, it takes time to
Ah,
get through also.
okay.
For life. It's Smooth 98.1. Love music, love life. Thanks a lot for staying tuned. I'm Ayo Myro Essay, and it's time for today's edition of I was going freshly pressed 981. It's a feel good Friday, and to join me to analyze the news stories today, I have Tunde Okufi. Morning, Tunde. How are you today?
I'm very well. Good morning, Naya.
Excellent. We also have Waji Jibuno. Morning, Waji. How are you?
Morning, Aya. Morning, Tunde. And good morning, Lagos.
Excellent. Okay, so let's get straight into. Okay, before we get straight into our stories, actually, this is how you can be a part of the show. Go onto our YouTube channel. We're streaming live. YouTube.com. Search for Smooth 981 FM Lagos. You can use the live chat option to send your message, or you can come onto WhatsApp if you're listening to us and send your message to contribute to the conversation. It's 0809 444 0981. That's the number to send your message to. Today I'll start with you. We're going to be talking about debt, opening up with debt. We borrowed our way out of recessions, says the President Buhari. He made this known in his budget presentation speech yesterday when he appeared before the National Assembly, a joint session of the National Assembly, and said the country would not have exited the two recessions fast enough without resorting to borrowing. Of course, I don't think he could have sidestepped the many criticisms and conversations around the level of borrowing of this government and the fact that he was coming again with the 2022 budget to say that we're going to fund the over 6 trillion naira deficit with more borrowing.
Yes, and in his budget speech, this is where he was, making a case to continue to borrow. Now, the president says that we've borrowed our way out of recession. I mean, the technical term, for recession is 2 quarters of negative growth, right? So once you get out of that, you're out of recession. So, very often we have this situation where we can tell ourselves based on economic measures or indices, or at least in economic talk, that we're out of recession.
Yeah.
But then the question very often is, how does that translate to the people right on the street?
Yep.
There's some Nigerians, older Nigerians, that you have these conversations with, and you say, oh, we're out of recession. Not even just about now, talking about, looking over a couple of decades. And the immediate response to Nigeria has always been a recession.
Always.
Because of the impact, and I think there's another story further down, the impact on the lives of the people.
Yeah.
Right. So now the president is speaking in technical terms that we're out of recession because we've recorded 1 quarter of growth, so it's fair. But then I recall there's an interview that Sanusi, former CBN governor, gave recently, and he was talking about how essentially how we've managed to reverse over 40 years gains of growth.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah, from 2019 down to I think it was 1980, right?
Yeah.
And how by current projections, that the per capita income is it's trending downwards. One, many of the arguments are population growth still outstrips, and everyone has been saying this for the longest time. If your population growth outstrips your GDP growth, you would always be in a problem. So what are the plans of the government? Yes, it's nice to say we're out of recession. It would have been nicer to say we're out of recession, not that we borrowed our way out of it, but we're not alone in doing that. Other nations can, they call it a stimulus package. Sometimes you need to borrow to do that, to inject funds into the economy to sort of, generate, economic activity. So that's not strange in that way. But it's very often down to how do we spend this money, what do we use it for, and then that's when you look at the split between in the budget between capital projects and recurring expenditure, and it's in the high 80s or at least early 90s percentage wise, right? So really and truly, are we borrowing our way out of recession? Yeah, those are the questions to look at. Are we truly borrowing our way out of recession? What is the plan? In his speech, he said the government is setting a target to increase revenue to GDP ratio.
Yeah.
Those are key, things that need to, be resolved. They need to grow the GDP. It needs to outstrip, population growth.
Yeah.
And we need to figure out a way. The government needs to make sure that those gains translate into the everyday lives of people, so that when you have conversations with man on the street say, "Oh, Nigeria is after the recession," they don't retort with,
Yeah.
Nigeria has always, been in recession.
Yeah. All right, thank you. He said that we don't have a debt sustainability problem, but a revenue challenge, which his government is determined to tackle to ensure debt remains sustainable.
I did touch on that in speaking about in the budget breakdown. So I didn't call that particular, but by saying that we're spending at least in the early 90% percentage-wise of our budget is recurring expenditure.
Yeah.
How is that sustainable?
Well, he's
And
tackling
you have a
it. He's
budget
working.
where you have a huge, you can't fund, then, how is it sustainable? At some point in time, what happens if your creditors start giving you money and you say it's not sustainable? You claim it's sustainable.
All right, thank you very much. We're still talking about the budget defense. Of course, it was big news yesterday, the president appearing before the joint session of the National Assembly. And now we take the other side. In response, the National Assembly have told, they told the president to sell refineries, moribund assets, reduce deficits, not just them, but other economists and experts have said. Waji, please let's go through this story in the Punch newspaper. What do you think about them advising the federal government to consider selling refineries and other assets being used, according to this article, to siphon public resources in order to realize resources required to finance part of the budget deficit?
I agree with it 100%. Primarily because when you think about that last line Tunde made reference to, that what are you going to do when your creditors stop giving you money? And that now brings to this particular point, which is when you have assets, and just think of it from a very layman point of view. Let's say you have a plot of land somewhere on the Lekki axis, or you have a plot of land in another state, or whatever the case may be, and you find yourself in a situation where you need cash. Either you want to invest in a new project, you want to build a new home or a new venture, you want to pay for your kids' school fees, or one of your children is getting married, you want to be able to have access to quick cash. So what do people normally do, Tunde? They don't quickly now go to a bank because of high interest rates. They take a look at what assets they have in their portfolio. They start selling them so that they can get cash to be able to fund these particular projects that they have, so that in the long-term run, you do not find yourself in debt. This is now a wonderful analogy to where Nigeria is. We are sitting on a lot of assets that we are currently using and funding to siphon money without necessarily generating revenue. You cannot keep putting budgetary allocations towards assets that do not give you revenue. It doesn't make any sense unless there's something funny going on. Now, if you want to look and ask about countries that have done this, the United Kingdom is a perfect example. Throughout the 60s and part of the 50s, especially after World War II, when they got into serious recession, into the 60s, into the 70s, into the 80s, they kept going to get bailout money, primarily from the USA. And I think it was, Trina, correct me if I'm wrong, if it was under the Reagan administration, when they kind of said, look, we're going to stop giving you money because we just can't keep bailing you guys out.
And that goes to Tune's point. What is the question?
So the question is, what did they do? That is when you now began to see a lot of the UK government-led institutions were now deregulating 100%. National gas, telecommunications, electricity. Because remember, prior to that, it was called British Petroleum, British Gas, British Electricity. They had to deregulate that entire industry and open themselves up to investment. Additionally, also real estate. The UK has some of the best real estate in the world, especially in places in Scotland, all parts of East Anglia, Southern England and everything else. And what they now started doing is selling it to Eastern Europeans, selling it to Asia, who wanted to now buy these wonderful castles and wonderful things. And what they now did was structure these particular programs where you could generate revenue. That's when you now began to see the turnaround in the UK economy. So you have some very brilliant people advising our government that you cannot keep borrowing yourself out of this situation. Because if your creditors tell you, do you know what? This well is dried up. We're going to turn off the tap. What are you going to do? So how about you start doing these things now? Yes, Tunde made a fantastic point, which I agree with. It is not uncommon to borrow, but you have to borrow with purpose. You have to borrow to be able to now link it to certain things that are going to now yield returns. But at the same time, if you're sitting on a bunch of assets that are giving you losses, and you can sell those assets that immediately inject money into the economy that can now give you somewhat of a reprieve, then you can use that money to now fund these particular things that you're referring to. Exactly. But first of all, we all know the reasons why they don't want to do it. And that is where the real problem is. So we need to have intellectual, honest conversations with ourselves from a very deep philosophical point of view as to the reasons why we are here. It's not as if we don't know what we need to do, Ayo. We're just choosing not to do it.
Absolutely. Thank you. Joyce says, good morning. Can we please stop comparing Nigeria with other countries when it comes to borrowing? It is so annoying. These countries have a plan. We borrow to fund politicians and their high taste. Stop comparing. And then Abayami says, countries take loans to fund a part of their budget. Most of our loans are tied to projects we can all see. If the country is not viable, no one will borrow us. What do you make of that?
What?
I don't agree.
I don't agree with that at all.
The loans are not always tied to projects. As you
No.
can see, multiple times here we're borrowing for the same initiative.
Yeah. Lagos Ibadan Expressway.
Yeah. So look, no,
And
Right.
creditors
we're
will
borrowing to fund the budget.
the budget, yeah,
The
and
vast majority of that is recurrent.
is
Yeah.
recurrent, and creditors will gladly give you that money
Yeah.
Yeah.
because of the high interest rates.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. And thanks a lot, Waji, for just breaking it down in terms of even thinking outside the box. Sometimes you wonder why it seems like rocket science and the only solution. I mean, Bismarck Rwani, well-known economist, said that there's no option to borrowing, that they have to borrow, but they have to borrow for the right reasons. But also, other experts have come out to say that in addition to borrowing,
Yes.
so that our
Divest
sole
your
dependence,
assets.
yes,
It doesn't
would
make
not
any
just be
sense. Yeah.
borrowing. Thank you very much. Today, consumers grown under bread sachet water price hike. We're coming back to something you alluded to in terms of the direct impact of a recession on the people, or the claim of the economic speak for saying we're out of a recession when the people haven't felt the impact. So this is now talking about residents of the Federal Capital Territory and some parts of Niger. However, I think this can actually apply to many parts of Nigeria beyond the FCT and Niger. They say they've been inundated with new prices of bread and sachet water, which began late September and first week of October. They say a bag of sachet water, which was hitherto sold for 100 naira, is now between 200 naira and 250 naira, while a unit price is sold for 20 naira as opposed to 10 naira. Sachet water, at least if there's something you cannot afford, most people, when it used to, at least you can afford to buy what you popularly call pure water and bread. You can eat bread and water, but now it's becoming out of the reach of the poorest of the poor, even just the poor, really. What do you make of this?
Okay, so I mean, just in case anyone feels like part of what I was alluding to is, so immediately you come out of recession, that people should start to feel the impact. Of course not. You have to record quarter after quarter after quarter. But sometimes we go through long stretches of economic growth, and it still doesn't. We still have that problem with the gap between the poor and rich, and it doesn't cascade downward. So that's speaking to that. But what are people feeling now? And it's not just in these parts, not just Niger and the FCT. It's a national story. Food inflation is at about 20%.
Yeah.
It is unthinkable. In fact, it's actually, in my view, it's a crisis, a national crisis, that food inflation can rise by that percentage within 1 year. When incomes haven't gone up, nothing really has changed. Really and truly, most people are living, or the vast majority. I mean, when we put it against poverty data and the number of people living below the poverty line, even if you're not below that line, how many people can survive a 20% swing in their costs within a year? So it is significant, and it's impacting the most basic necessities: water, bread, the basic things. And that's a proxy. I know that the story focuses on that, but it's a proxy for absolutely everything, right? In this interview given by Mr. Dasuma, he points that insecurity is also one of the issues. Clearly, insecurity is one of the things that is impacting. So since 2019 or late 2019, we've been hit by double whammy of or triple whammy of insecurity that didn't just start as being brewing, which we didn't resolve. COVID, and falling oil prices, right? Oil prices are somewhat recovering, and to good on another cycle of going down. But anyway, those three things coming together really did hit the country, and it's resulted in a situation that we're in. But what can we control? We can control things like security, hopefully, at least to some degree. But it is impacting. Security is one of the things that's impacted mostly on food, inflation, right? And if we can sort that out, there's also talk of double taxation. So guys who he's speaking specifically about his industry, and him talking about taxation just reminds me of a quote, I think is Churchill, that said that, look, as a nation, you cannot tax your way into prosperity. It's like standing in a bucket and trying to lift yourself up by the handle. You know, it doesn't work. But that seems to be like the default in a lot of the default thinking a lot of the time. You know, of the government. But these are the realities of the people. You can have all the nice talks. You can say, you know, we're going to borrow, or we borrowed our way out of recession, but people need to feel it.
Yeah.
And for me, it's a crisis when, you know, food rises by the percentage that it has.
Yeah, Atune, thank you for setting that foundation. I want us to also talk about the response, at least from a rep, Mohamed Monguno, the chief whip of the House of Representatives, who's proposed a bill to regulate the prices of food in the country. He's saying that he's seeking to compel the executive arm of the government to regulate the prices of food and other items to guarantee food security. Now, let me
guess what?
Yeah.
The last time we heard about it was when Buhari was in government,
Yeah.
as in uniform.
Yeah.
You know, so it's to that playbook. You know, and
Is this
I don't know
is
this
this
guy.
the
I know it's not
solution?
from him.
No,
not
it's
the
his
solution.
playbook, but it's his playbook.
It's a playbook. It's not coming from him, but
Yeah.
I know these guys were around when he was there, and you know, I don't
He's
know.
the chief whip of the House of Representatives, by the way.
It's the same
The
playbook.
reason I'm saying that is that prior to, just before this, we've
And
seen
it literally
some,
tanked our economy.
yeah, bakers are saying that the prices have gone up. You've mentioned the reasons why we've seen this food inflation. Not one of them is because people just want to be smart and increase the prices. There are real concerns by producers. So they're not talking about helping producers, help them, you know, provide an environment for them to thrive and reduce cost of food. Is to regulate them so that they have no choice. Look at this example from Emeka in Amo was saying, a friend of mine here in Lagos has been forced to close down his bakery because he could no longer increase the price of his bread due to increasing price of flour. He also said some bakers are forced to illegally use bromate just to meet up. I saw this conversation on social media. A number of bakers were having is that they are you know, they are bakers, just even with cakes and all that. Those are luxury goods, but you know, down to food like bread, that they are forced to do illegal things because they just cannot meet up. So they can't meet up with the cost, and then they cannot also increase the price because people would not buy it, and you can't understand why your bread has gone up from 400 naira a loaf to 700 naira a loaf when your salary is still 30,000 naira as minimum wage, and in some hasn't yet been effected. Let's move on to our next story. Waji, Zamfara secures release of 200 additional kidnapped victims. Good news from the Guardian newspaper. The Zamfara government on Thursday said it has secured the release of no fewer than 200 additional people abducted by bandits through peace dialogue and other security measures.
Like you said, it's quote unquote good news in the sense of 200 additional kidnapped victims have been released. And I think for me, I always want to throw caution to the wind in celebrating such wins, because it doesn't necessarily get to the root of the actual issue as to why is this happening to begin with, which is where the real conversation has to start with. And unless we get very honest with ourselves about why we are where we are, when you begin to look at economic disparities, when we're talking about all these things about food prices and inflation in food going up by 20% and people not being able to afford it, and then salaries not being increased, even down to minimum wage and all these different things, until you tackle those issues, you're just going to continue to have a sector where it's growing in reference to kidnapping because people are just trying to make money. So it's a fantastic thing that 200 people have been released. This is very, very important. It's unfortunate that there have been some deaths as well in the process of those releases, but I think we need to get to the root of the security issue, which is heavily, heavily, heavily connected and enshrined in poverty.
Thank you very much. Right, CBN commits over 1.3 trillion naira to boosting economy. So, Tunde, the director of corporate communications of the bank, or CBN, Mr. Osita Nwani Sobi, disclosed this at the 16th International Trade Fair organized by Abuja Chamber of Commerce. Anyways, what he's highlighted in this article are some of the interventions of the CBN since the outbreak of COVID, following the outbreak of COVID. He's mentioned the Agribusiness Small and Medium Enterprises Investment Scheme, Anchor Borrower Scheme, and so on. But I want to ask you, how well have CBN interventions helped boost the economy following the COVID outbreak?
Look at it now, food inflation, 20%, general inflation, you know, when you normalize it about 17%. It has helped. Let's I mean, obviously, it has, these are long-standing interventions, to be honest. So they're not particularly new, but they're, some of those funds were doubled up. Some, ones were introduced specifically for COVID. They made funds available also for people to, pivot to providing adjusting or at least providing medical. People wanted to focus on in the medical sector,
Yeah.
manufacturing and stuff. So it has helped. This is the central bank going over some of its long-standing interventions, and the central bank is one of the ways through which has intervened, over the years in with all these funds, with specific focuses on certain sectors. I mean, if you look at, but the argument can be made that if you look at over the time that these interventions or these funds were made available,
Yeah.
how much, how impactful they have been, that probably is a different debate, because with a special focus on special funds, say for instance in the agri sector, why haven't we seen a lot more change? Why hasn't agriculture suddenly started competing with the amount of time that this has been going on, competing at least favorably with, against oil in terms of government earning income? We haven't seen that yet, but they are important and they're necessary. They can run more efficiently. Many people argue that these funds are here, but again, speaking to the point as an impact on people's lives, it still feels very difficult for people to access, some of these funds. So there's an agri fund, but how easy is it for someone who is in agriculture, to get access to the funds? You're an SME. How easy is it for you to get access to some of these, funds and interventions? They must be there. So.
Okay, because the reason I asked is because it's just like we've talked about. It's easy to bandy numbers and interventions and wins in quotes
They're nice
without
to say at,
yes.
when you're at conferences.
Yes. But do we actually have impact assessments, or do we have reports of impact assessments of these interventions?
We do. It's just that they're not
they're all there.
They are, but very often, or until the best ones are the ones that are independent. Someone looks at it and says, okay, what's your plan?
But the ones that are commissioned are
The ones that are commissions are not independent.
All right, thank you very much. Why UK imposed travel restrictions on vaccinated Nigerians? I think there's an update to this story because the UK and Nigeria have released a statement. But the Chairman Expert Review Committee on COVID-19, Professor Oyewole Tomori, has provided reasons why the UK were set to have imposed travel restrictions. Now, we will take the official statement from the UK in terms of travel policy for Nigerians who have been vaccinated or not vaccinated. But other parts of this story in terms of merit, I would say would be, and I'd like you to touch on this, Waji, would be the conversation around fake documents and the reliability of tests done in Nigeria and people trying to cut corners when it comes to vaccinations and travel.
Okay, so the actual story, and for me, there's a larger point. Why, when I saw this story, I was a bit shocked because I was like, okay, a procedure was not followed with regard to tracking certain things. About maybe 2-3 weeks ago, Katarina Lang, the UK High Commissioner to Nigeria, had made it absolutely clear that vaccines taken in Nigeria will be accepted by the United Kingdom.
Yeah.
That was level 1 of her statement. And level 2 of her statement, which was ignored for some reason, was that that she is working very closely as a go-between, which is the UK government and the authorities on COVID-19 and the Nigerian Health Ministry, to ensure that there is some kind of system that now accepts vaccinations done in Nigeria. So the issue was always about trust. The issue was that, okay, there's a preponderance that Nigerians may, aside from that particular process, get fake documentation that shows they've been vaccinated to now be able to go through these things. And these are very valid concerns. It's a combination of two things. One being that historically we have these challenges, primarily because you have Nigerians who come out very openly and say, I'm going to go pay to get my vaccine card.
Yeah.
And they come out acting as if people in the international community cannot hear them. People post on all sorts of social media who they paid, how much they paid to, and if they want the hookup, they've got the source. So when you do things like that, what do you expect?
Yeah.
So we are the actual source of our own issue. And the second is, which I don't particularly agree with, is that you have people who are landing, which is what was stated in this article.
Yeah.
You have people that are landing in other countries who are testing COVID positive. That doesn't make any sense because what you're implying is that if you're vaccinated, you cannot catch COVID, which is not true. And I think that's the narrative that has been, improperly put out there. Okay. And also, just because you test today and you travel tomorrow, you can still catch COVID tonight. So I don't understand that rationale.
What she's speaking to is the integrity of our testing process before you travel. You take the PCR test, that, but there's not people come by.
Exactly.
So
Right.
that's what she's
So I guess,
referring to there.
I guess
Yeah.
even for the professor in this article is because there's, like you've mentioned earlier on, that lack of trust.
Yeah,
So
so
that
it all stems from
informs.
lack of
Yeah.
it stems from lack of trust, but at the same time, and this is going to be very shocking that I'm going to say it, but the British High Commissioner has actually done an outstanding job lobbying on behalf of Nigeria. She has, because as of yesterday, we were put on that approved list.
Yes. Yes.
And
you
our
will.
vaccine cards can now be accepted to the UK.
Yeah.
So I think we have to take a step back, allow some certain diplomatic processes to take place before we jump to conclusions, or at the very minimum, listen and be part of those conversations. She has been very transparent. She has welcomed and said many things to the press. So when I saw these things, the UK has banned this, I was like, what do you now create this sensation, and then
it's
literally
sensational.
hours after, you now see us on that list. So I think we just need to pay a bit more attention, understand that these things are process, and then just trust that process.
So just to clarify, in case you haven't seen the update, we are now on that list. So we can, if you've been vaccinated, you are allowed without having to go through the 10-day or to have a 10-day quarantine. You would have to do
And
a
also,
2-day.
you don't have to do a pre-departure test,
Yeah.
but you have to do a 2-day
Two-day.
lateral flow test,
Yeah.
which is much cheaper than the PCR test.
Right.
So that's it. Yeah.
So those are that's a case for the vaccine for those who want to travel. So it's things are opening up now in terms
Exactly.
of around the world.
Right.
Just to mention that. All right, thank you. Let's see if we can touch on this one. Tunde, soldiers arresting a popular Nigerian actor called Chiwetalu Agu for wearing Biafra flag outfit. According to this report, sources had confirmed that the actor was being beaten and arrested after he was said to have dressed in the Biafran flag outfit as a sign of solidarity for IPOB, indigenous people of Biafra. Tunde, let me hear your thoughts on this actually.
Okay. I won't pretend to know the
No, don't say. Okay, I was say
aspect
you
of
won't
it.
pretend to know the actor.
No,
I was gonna say no, don't say that.
no,
It's all right.
I won't pretend to know the legal implications of it, but the images that come to mind are when when a thief is caught on the streets, or alleged thief, because he hasn't gone to court. I mean, we're a country with laws, right? Alleged thief is caught on the streets, and people decide to do jungle justice and lynch him to death, or burn him or whatever. That's the image that comes to mind. So even let's say that there was a law against this, because there might not be.
Yeah.
Right.
I was gonna ask, is it a crime to wear the flag?
You to wear whatever it is that you want to wear. I mean, I'm not aware that we're in a nation where we have a official dress code, right? But let's say there even is a law against this. Is his treatment is breaking the law how you uphold the law?
Yeah.
Is his treatment in line with the law? If he's broken the law in some way and disturbed the peace, and argue that probably wasn't disturbing the peace in the part of the nation it was. Now, if you had done this maybe in certain other parts of the country, you say maybe it was disturbing the peace. But if you can't say he was doing that, then are your actions justified? And if there's a law against it, let it follow the path. Not this as it is. This is kidnapping. It's arbitrary detention.
Yeah.
It's beating. It's so many things. How do you uphold the law by breaking the law?
So can he sue?
Again, I don't know from I'm not a lawyer, but based on off of this, I think he has a case. He's being treated. His civil and human rights have been violated, in my opinion. Right? That's one case. That doesn't impugn the government or the state's case if he had broken the law. Right? It's just like a burglar goes to your house, and you still find policemen who are prosecuted in civilized crimes, who are prosecuted in how they meted out justice or apprehended a criminal. It doesn't change the fact that he broke the law, yes, but did he use excessive force?
He's still entitled to his rights.
Some rights.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much indeed. Final story, just as a way of mention, Pandora Papers update. I know that we'll be talking about this perhaps for a few more days, as Premium Times is doing a series for us. They're just releasing the names one after the other. So the Vanguard said that Peter Obi has responded to the fact that he's been listed with having some offshore underground companies and accounts, and he says he didn't break any Nigerian law. If you want to see the details of that, you can go on to Vanguard, and I think it's reported in some other papers. All right, thank you very, very much, Tunde and Waji. Tunde is at Big Hoofs on social media, while Waji is at corporate MC, the corporate with a K. I would have said Twitter because now they say they're going to lift the ban with conditions. But since October 1, this is a week, exactly 1 week afterwards, the ban hasn't
They're
been
still
lifted yet. They're still negotiating the
Certain
terms and what
terms.
would be.
Certain terms.
All right. Thank you so very much. We continue the show this morning at 8:10. We'll open the lines for Lagos Talks 981. However, today is a Feel Good Friday, so we're not talking politics or current affairs. We're going into fashion, actually. We have a guest coming to join me this morning, and we're going to be asking questions I would love to hear your thoughts on. So stay tuned here on Smooth 98.1. Thank you.
Okay. So I see Emeka's point. I hope it's not like I was not making a case for the guy saying that what he did was right, yeah.
Yes, no, you weren't making a case. No, like you mentioned,
No, it
that
doesn't
everyone
matter how
has
you
a
say it.
right.
It's true.
Yeah, everyone
Yeah.
has a right to their rights, and that's what I think. It's because as Nigerians, we don't actually understand.
We don't
haven't
understand that
seen it-
principle.
We
Yeah,
don't
we
see
haven't seen it
the
in
principle
most
of
people just haven't lived in
having
civilized
equal
society.
rights.
People just haven't lived in civilized society.
Look at this.
Yeah, it's
No, he said
yeah, I
on
think
Monday. He said
from
on
Monday.
a Monday morning at 4
We are on now.
Yeah, so regardless of what the guy did, regardless, you know, as long as you believe that as a principle that you shouldn't mob someone who's been